Naledi Makona had been looking forward to coming home all week. After 7 busy days on a business trip, all she wanted was a hot shower, a good night's sleep, and a quiet evening in the house where she had grown up in Cape Town, South Africa. As she rolled her suitcase through the front door, everything looked normal at first. The living room was clean, the television was on, and her stepmother, Zinal Dlamini, was sitting comfortably on the couch. Naledi smiled politely and greeted her before carrying her bags toward her bedroom. The moment she opened her bedroom door, something felt wrong. Her eyes moved across the room until they reached the empty corner beside the window. She froze. The old wooden chest that had always been there was gone. Her heart started beating faster. She searched the room again, thinking maybe someone had moved it. She looked under the bed, inside the closet, and even checked the spare room. It was nowhere to be found. Trying to stay calm, Naledi walked back into the living room. "Zinal, where's my wooden chest?" she asked. Her stepmother barely looked up from the television. Instead, she laughed. "Oh, that old thing," she said with a shrug. "I threw away that pile of useless junk while you were gone. It was just taking up space." For a few seconds, Naledi couldn't even speak. "You threw it away?" she whispered. "Yes," Zinal replied casually. "Honestly, you should thank me. The house looks much cleaner now." Naledi felt like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. That chest wasn't filled with junk. It held her late mother's favorite books, handwritten letters, family photographs, an old necklace she used to wear every day, and small keepsakes collected over many years. Every item carried a memory. Every item reminded Naledi of the mother she had lost when she was still young. Those weren't expensive things, at least as far as Naledi knew, but they were priceless to her. Tears filled her eyes as she stood there, unable to believe what she had just heard. A week away from home had been enough for someone else to erase the last physical pieces of her mother's life. Without saying another word, Naledi ran outside toward the garbage bins, praying that somehow, it wasn't too late. That night, Naledi could not sleep. She kept thinking about the wooden chest and everything that had been inside it. As the hours passed, old memories came rushing back. Losing the chest felt like losing her mother all over again. Naledi was only 8 years old when her mother passed away after a long illness. The house had never felt the same after that. Her father tried to stay strong, but he buried himself in work, and 2 years later, he married Zinal Dlamini. Everyone around them said it was a fresh start for the family. Naledi wanted to believe that too. At first, Zinal acted kind. She smiled often and told Naledi she would always be treated like her own daughter. But little by little, things began to change. The first thing to disappear was a framed photo of Naledi's mother that had always been on the living room shelf. When Naledi asked where it had gone, Zinal simply said it made the house look too sad. A few weeks later, another picture disappeared, then another. Before long, there wasn't a single photo of her mother anywhere in the house. The family traditions Naledi loved also slowly faded away. Every year, her mother had baked her favorite honey cake on her birthday. After Zinal came, that tradition ended. The songs her mother used to play on Sunday mornings were never played again. Even simple stories about her mother seemed unwelcome. Whenever Naledi mentioned her, Zinal would quickly change the subject or tell her it was time to move on. It wasn't just the memories. Her mother's clothes, books, decorations, and personal things were treated like old clutter. Every few months, Zinal would gather boxes and say the house needed another cleanup. Naledi watched more and more of her mother's belongings disappear without anyone asking how she felt. Her father rarely noticed. If Naledi tried to speak up, he would say, "Zinal is only trying to keep the house organized." After hearing that enough times, Naledi stopped arguing. She learned that staying quiet was easier than fighting a battle no one else seemed to see. There was only one thing she protected with all her heart. The old wooden chest stayed locked in the corner of her bedroom. It held the last pieces of her mother's life that no one had managed to take away. Naledi never imagined that one day, even that would no longer be safe. The next morning, Naledi woke up before sunrise. She didn't waste a single minute. Wearing yesterday's clothes, she rushed outside and ran straight to the garbage bins behind the house. She pulled out one trash bag after another, ignoring the smell and the dirt. Her hands became dusty, and tears kept falling down her face, but she refused to stop. She kept telling herself, maybe it's still here. Maybe I'm not too late. When she found nothing, she searched every corner of the property. She looked inside the garage, the storage room, and even under old furniture, hoping Zinal had lied about throwing the chest away. but it was gone. Nality got into her car and drove to the neighborhood waste collection site. Her heart was pounding the entire way. She knew every minute mattered. If the trash truck had already emptied everything, her mother's memories could be lost forever. As soon as she arrived, she started asking everyone she saw if they had noticed an old wooden chest or boxes filled with old papers, books, and family keepsakes. Most people shook their heads. Some felt sorry for her, but couldn't help. Just when she was about to lose hope, an older sanitation worker stopped her. "I think I remember what you're talking about," he said. "There was an old wooden chest yesterday. It looked different from the usual rubbish." Nality stepped closer, holding her breath. "What happened to it?" she asked. The man explained that before the garbage truck arrived, a man driving a small pickup truck had stopped by. He often looked through discarded items for antiques or things that could be sold. He opened the chest, took several old-looking books, papers, framed pictures, and a few small objects before leaving. The damaged chest itself was later thrown into the truck with the rest of the trash. Nality's heart sank for a moment. The chest was gone, but then another feeling took its place. Hope. If someone had taken the items before they were destroyed, then they still existed somewhere. Her mother's memories had not completely disappeared. They were scattered, probably in different places, but they were still out there. Nality thanked the sanitation worker and asked every question she could think of. Did he know the man's name? Where did he usually sell things? Did he remember the truck's number plate? The worker couldn't give many answers. He only knew the man sometimes visited local flea markets and antique shops around the city. It wasn't much to go on, but it was enough. As Nality got back in her car, she wiped away her tears. For the first time since coming home, she felt a small spark of hope. She had no idea who now owned her mother's belongings or how far they had traveled, but she made herself one promise. She would find every single piece, no matter how long it took. That evening, Nality returned home feeling exhausted. She had spent the entire day searching, asking questions, and driving from one place to another, but she still had no real leads. As she sat on the floor of her bedroom, she looked through a small box of old family papers that had been stored in the back of her closet. She wasn't expecting to find anything important. She was simply hoping for something, anything that could help. While flipping through faded documents and old certificates, she noticed a small brown envelope tucked between two folders. It was sealed and covered in dust, as if no one had touched it for years. Her hands began to shake. Written neatly across the front were the words, "For my daughter, Nality." It was her mother's handwriting. Nality carefully opened the envelope, trying not to damage the paper inside. As she unfolded the letter, tears filled her eyes before she even read the first line. Her mother wrote that if Nality was reading this letter, she was probably old enough to understand a family secret that had been protected for generations. The letter explained that the old wooden chest was never meant to be an ordinary storage box. Inside it were handwritten family journals dating back more than 100 years. There were also rare historical documents, antique jewelry passed from mother to daughter, original paintings created by their ancestors, and several valuable family records that told the story of their heritage. Her mother wrote that every generation had been trusted to protect the collection and pass it on to the next. One day, that responsibility would belong to Nality. Then came a sentence that made her stop breathing for a moment. Her mother explained that experts had once examined part of the collection many years earlier. They believed the items together could be worth several $1,000,000 because of their historical importance, rarity, and excellent condition. Nality read the sentence again and again, hardly believing her eyes. Until that moment, she had only been thinking about memories. She had believed the chest contained priceless emotional treasures, but she had never imagined it also held incredible financial value. Suddenly, everything changed. Zinel had not just thrown away family keepsakes. She had unknowingly scattered a collection that carried generations of history and could now be worth millions. Nality folded the letter carefully and held it in her chest. "This is exactly why Mom wanted me to protect it," she whispered. At that moment, her search became about much more than recovering old memory. She was now fighting to save her family's history before it disappeared forever. The next morning, Nality made a careful plan. She did not tell Zinel about the letter or the true value of the collection. The fewer people who knew, the better. She made copies of her mother's letter, gathered old family photographs that showed some of the missing items, and packed every document that could help prove they belonged to her family. Her search soon took her far beyond Cape Town. She traveled to Johannesburg and Pretoria, visiting antique shops, estate auctions, private collectors, and historical archives. At every stop, she carried the same folder, asked the same question. Have you seen any of these items? Most people politely shook their head. Some remembered seeing old books or jewelry that looked similar, but nothing seemed certain. Days turned into weeks, and the search became tiring. There were moments when Naledi wondered if she was chasing pieces that had already been sold all over the world. Then one afternoon, everything changed. An antique dealer suggested she speak with Thabo Ndlovu, a respected museum curator who specialized in African history and family collections. Naledi arranged a meeting and showed him the photographs and the letter. Thabo studied the pictures carefully. His eyes widened when he saw one of the handwritten journals. I've seen this style before, he said quietly. These are not ordinary family records. They are historically important. He explained that collectors were always looking for rare handwritten journals, old artwork, and antique jewelry with a clear family history. If the items from the chest had entered the market, they could already be in private collections or waiting to be sold at auction. Instead of giving up, Thabo offered to help. He contacted museums, trusted antique dealers, auction houses, and other historians he knew across the country. Within days, small pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. The first item they recovered was an old silver necklace that had belonged to Naledi's great-grandmother. A collector had bought it without knowing where it came from. After seeing Naledi's documents and family photographs, he willingly returned it. A few days later, one of the handwritten journals was found in a small antique shop. Inside its pages was a folded note with the name of another collector who had purchased several paintings from the same man who had taken the items from the waste collection site. Every item Naledi recovered revealed another clue. With each new lead, she felt closer to putting her family's history back together. The search was far from over, but for the first time, she truly believed the entire collection could still be found before it disappeared forever. While Naledi quietly continued searching for the missing collection, Zinel had no idea what was really happening. She still believed the wooden chest had contained nothing but old papers and useless family belongings. Whenever relatives visited the house, she proudly told them how she had finally cleaned up the place. You should have seen that old chest, she would say with a laugh. It was full of dusty junk. I threw all of it away while Naledi was on her trip. The house looks so much better now. Some relatives smiled politely, but others looked uncomfortable. They knew how much Naledi loved the things that had belonged to her mother. Even if the items had no money value, they understood they meant everything to her. A few weeks later, the story began to spread in a very different way. One of the antique dealers mentioned that rare family journals connected to an old South African family had appeared in the collector's market. Soon, whispers started reaching people who knew Naledi. Someone mentioned that the missing items could be worth an enormous amount of money. Before long, the rumors reached Zinel. At first, she refused to believe them. But after secretly asking around and hearing the same story from different people, her face turned pale. If that's true, she whispered to herself, what have I done? Almost overnight, her attitude changed completely. The woman who had laughed about throwing everything away was suddenly desperate to get it all back. Without telling Naledi, Zinel started calling antique shops, collectors, and auction houses. She even visited a few stores herself, pretending she was trying to recover family property. She offered money to anyone who might have bought the missing items and begged for information about where they had. But her sudden interest only made people suspicious. Several dealers had already met Naledi and knew her story. They remembered the documents, the family photographs, and the letter written by her mother. When Zinel arrived asking questions, they realized something was not right. As more people learned what had happened, old family stories began coming back. Relatives remembered how Zinel had spent years calling Naledi's mother's belongings clutter. They remembered how she encouraged everyone to forget the past and remove every reminder of Naledi's mother from the house. It became clear that this was never just about cleaning. For years, Zinel had quietly erased anything connected to the woman who came before. Now that she believed those same things might be worth millions, she suddenly wanted them back. Her panic revealed the truth that had been hidden for years. It wasn't kindness that had guided her actions. It was jealousy, control, and now greed. And with every desperate phone call she made, more people began to see her for who she really was. After weeks of searching and recovering more pieces of the collection, Nality realized it was time for the rest of the family to know the truth. Instead of arguing with Zinnel or starting another painful fight, she decided to let the facts speak for themselves. She invited her father, aunts, uncles, cousins, and a few older relatives to a quiet family dinner at her home. She told everyone it was important and asked them to come with an open mind. No one knew exactly why they had been invited, but they could all sense that something serious had happened. When everyone had finished eating, Nality stood up, thanked them for coming. She placed a small box on the dining table and slowly took out its content. First came the letter written by her mother. Then she laid out old family photographs showing the wooden chest sitting in her childhood bedroom for many years. Next came faded receipts, handwritten records, and official appraisal document proving that the collection had both historical and financial value. The room became very quiet. Nality did not raise her voice or blame anyone. She simply explained what had happened while she was away, how the chest had been thrown out without her permission, and how she had spent weeks searching across the country to recover the missing items. As each document was passed around the table, the expressions on everyone's faces began to change. One aunt suddenly spoke up. "I remember your mother telling us never to separate those journals," she said softly. An older uncle nodded. "And I remember that necklace. It belonged to your great-grandmother." Soon, more relatives began sharing their own memory, and the conversation turned toward Zinnel. One cousin remembered hearing her call Nality's mother's belongings old rubbish. Another aunt recalled how Zinnel had encouraged Nality to donate or throw away almost everything connected to her mother. Someone else remembered asking why there were no family photos left on the wall, and Zinnel had simply said they were no longer needed. Piece by piece, everyone realized this had not been a single mistake. It was part of a pattern that had lasted for years. All eyes slowly turned towards Zinnel. For the first time, no one accepted her explanations without question. The stories, photographs, letters, and official papers all pointed to the same truth. The room fell into complete silence. Zinnel looked around the table and realized that the people who had once believed her were now quietly questioning everything she had ever said about Nality and her late mother. The silence in the room did not last long. Zinnel suddenly pushed back her chair and stood up. Her face had turned red, and she looked from one family member to another, hoping someone would defend her. "I didn't know those things were valuable," she said quickly. "How was I supposed to know? I was only trying to help clean the house. It wasn't my fault." But this time, no one answered right away. Nality stayed calm. She looked at Zinnel and quietly said, "This was never about money. I asked you many times over the years not to touch that chest because it was all I had left of Mom." Several relatives nodded in agreement. Nality's aunt spoke first. "She's telling the truth," she said. "I heard Nality say the same thing years ago. She always asked for that chest to be left alone." Another cousin remembered visiting the house and hearing Zinnel complain that the chest was taking up space. An uncle recalled that Nality had even placed a small note inside the bedroom, asking everyone not to move or open it. One witness after another shared similar memories. With every story, Zinnel's excuses became weaker. She tried again. "I was only thinking about the house. I thought those old things were useless." "But Nality told you they mattered to her," one relative replied. "You didn't have to know they were worth millions. You only had to respect that they belonged to her." Those words filled the room with another long silence. For the first time that evening, Nality's father lowered his head. He had listened to every story without saying much, but now the truth was impossible to ignore. He remembered all the times Nality had quietly tried to protect her mother's belongings. He remembered brushing off her concerns and telling her not to make a big issue out of it. He had believed Zinnel whenever she said she was simply organizing the house. Now, he realized how often he had failed to listen to his own daughter. He looked at Nality with tears in his eyes. "I'm so sorry," he said softly. "I should have protected you. I should have protected your mother's memory. I didn't see what was happening, and I let you carry this pain by yourself." Nality did not say anything. She simply looked at her father, knowing that no apology could bring back the years she had lost. Around the table, everyone understood that this was about far more than a wooden chest. Years of favoritism, silence, and neglect had finally been brought into the open, and there was no pretending anymore that nothing had happened. After the family gathering, things began to move much faster. With the help of a lawyer, Nality organized every document she had collected. She had her mother's handwritten letter, old family photographs, receipts, appraisal reports, and records showing that the collection had belonged to her family. Together, they clearly proved that the missing items were hers. Her lawyer contacted antique dealers, auction houses, museums, and private collectors who had bought pieces from the collection. Instead of making angry demands, they simply explained the full story and shared the evidence. Many people were shocked when they learned what had happened. Most of the buyers had no idea the items had been thrown away without the owner's permission. They believed they had purchased ordinary antiques from someone who had legally obtained them. When they discovered the truth, many chose to do the right thing. A museum returned 2 rare handwritten journals that had already been prepared for a historical exhibition. A private collector gave back several original paintings after seeing the family photographs and reading part of Naledi's mother's letter. Another collector returned an antique jewelry box that had been passed down through generations of Naledi's family. Not everyone cooperated immediately. A few items required legal action before they were returned. The process took months, but little by little, the collection came back together. Every time another piece was recovered, Naledi carefully cleaned it, documented it, and placed it safely in a secure storage room. Holding each item again felt like bringing a small part of her mother back home. When experts finally examined the restored collection, they confirmed what Naledi's mother's letter had said years earlier. Together, the journals, historical documents, artwork, and antique jewelry were worth several $1,000,000. The news spread quickly, and many people focused on the incredible value of the collection. But Naledi saw it differently. Whenever someone congratulated her for recovering such a valuable treasure, she simply smiled. The money was never the reason, she would say. If these things had been worth nothing, I would have searched just as hard. To her, the true treasure was not the price written on an appraisal report. It was the stories inside the handwritten journals, the faces in the old photographs, the paintings created by her ancestors, and the memories her mother had trusted her to protect. At last, her family's history was no longer scattered across strangers' shelves. It had finally found its way home. Several months later, Naledi's life looked very different. Instead of locking the recovered collection inside a private room, she decided to share it with others. She opened a cultural foundation in her mother's name, with one simple goal: to protect African history, art, and family heritage so future generations would never lose these important stories. The recovered journals, paintings, historical documents, and antique jewelry became the heart of the exhibition. Visitors came from different cities to see the collection and learn about the families. Many people left inspired to preserve their own family photographs, letters, and traditions before they were lost forever. Zinel quietly disappeared from Naledi's life. After everything that had happened, there was no trust left between them. Naledi chose peace over anger and focused on building a better future instead of holding on to the past. Her father visited the foundation often. He never tried to erase his mistakes or make excuses. Little by little, he worked to rebuild his relationship with Naledi. It wasn't easy, but this time he listened more than he spoke, and that meant everything to her. One afternoon, Naledi stood alone inside the exhibition hall, looking at the wooden journals, the paintings, the jewelry, and the smiling photographs of her mother. She smiled through tears as she realized something important. Her mother had not only left her a valuable collection, she had left her a sense of identity, a connection to her ancestors, and a family legacy that no amount of money could replace. No one would ever be able to throw that away again.